"Move your things, this room is mine now," my stepson said, until he saw the deed. The scent of a man lingers long after he's gone. It stays woven into the fabric of his favorite sweaters, a ghost you can hold in your hands. I was standing in the bedroom I had shared with my husband, David, for 12 years, folding his old, gray cardigan. The wool was soft against my fingertips, and if I closed my eyes, I could almost smell his familiar scent of cedar, tobacco, and old books. It was a small comfort in a house that had grown cavernous with silence since his passing. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. The casseroles had stopped coming, the flowers were wilting on the dining room table, and the world was expecting me to move on. But grief is not a straight line, loves. It is a heavy fog that you have to navigate one stumbling step at a time. I was trying to decide what to keep and what to give away, a task that felt like tearing my own heart into pieces when a shadow fell across the room. I looked up, wiping a stray tear from my cheek. My stepson Mark was standing in the doorway. He didn't knock. He just stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, his presence filling the space with a cold, heavy energy. He was a man of 35, dressed in a sharp suit, but in that moment, he looked like a stern landlord, not a grieving son. He let his eyes sweep over the room. The antique dresser David and I had refinished together. The queen-sized bed where I still slept on my own side, the photographs of our travels on the nightstand. He wasn't looking at memories, he was taking inventory. He looked at the walls as if he were measuring them for paint. He looked at the floor as if imagining new carpets. Then his eyes landed on me. "Move your things," he said. His voice was calm, devoid of any emotion, which made the words even more brutal. "This room is mine now." I froze, the cardigan clutched to my chest like a shield. I must have misheard him. The grief, the exhaustion, it must have been playing tricks on my ears. What did you say, Mark?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, trembling in the quiet air. "I'm moving into the master bedroom," he clarified, as if speaking to a slow-witted child. He gestured vaguely with his chin. "My old room is too small for my things, and since Dad is gone, it makes sense for me to take this one. You can have the guest room downstairs. It's smaller, easier for you to keep clean." My heart didn't just drop, it plummeted. It was the way he said it, not as a request, not as a discussion, but as a final decision that had been made without me. He wasn't asking for my permission. He was announcing my removal. He was evicting me from my own life, one room at a time. I stared at him, at this man-child I had cooked countless meals for, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose graduation I had wept at with pride. I saw no trace of that boy in the cold, calculating stranger standing in my doorway. In his eyes, I was no longer David's wife or a member of this family. I was just an obstacle, an inconvenience occupying valuable square footage. In that instant, I understood. They weren't waiting for me to heal. They weren't concerned with my grief. They had already decided I no longer belonged here. My role in this family had expired the moment David's heart stopped beating. But he had made one critical mistake. He assumed my silence was weakness. To understand the sting of that moment, you have to understand the years that came before it. I didn't come into this family as a young, blushing bride trying to steal a father away. David and I found each other later in life. Two souls who had already weathered the storms of loneliness and loss. I met David at the community library 12 years ago. He was a widower, still wearing his grief like a heavy coat, and I was a woman who had resigned herself to a quiet, solitary life. But over coffee and shared book recommendations, something sparked. It wasn't a wildfire, it was a warm, steady hearth fire. When he asked me to marry him, he promised me not just a husband but a home, a family. Mark was 23 then. His sister, Sarah, was 20. They were grown, yet still carried the wounds of losing their mother young. I knew I was walking into a delicate ecosystem. I knew the stepmother title came with jagged edges. So, I entered their lives gently. I walked on eggshells until they turned into floorboards. I never tried to force affection. I never asked them to call me Mom. I simply tried to be Grace. David's wife, their supporter. The woman who made sure the house was warm and the fridge was full. I remember the first Christmas. I spent days baking the specific cookies their mother used to make, hunting down the recipe from an old aunt, just so they would have a taste of their childhood. When Mark took a bite, he didn't say thank you. He just looked at me and said, "It's a little dry." I smiled and promised to do better next year. I swallowed the criticism because I loved his father, and I believed that love is a verb. It is something you do, over and over again until it breaks down walls. I celebrated their promotions. I sat in the back rows of their weddings, careful not to obstruct the view of the real family. I nursed David through his first heart attack, sleeping in a chair at the hospital for 3 days straight while Mark and Sarah came and went. I cooked. I cleaned. I kept the peace during their arguments with their father. I became the invisible glue that held the edges of the family together. And over the years, the tension seemed to ease. We had Sunday dinners. We exchanged gifts. I thought truly and deeply that I had earned my place. I thought that time and consistency had turned me from an outsider into family. But as I stood there clutching David's cardigan, looking into Mark's cold eyes, I realized I had been living a fantasy. I hadn't earned a place. I had just been filling a vacancy. The shift didn't happen gradually. It happened the moment the dirt hit the casket. At the funeral, Mark and Sarah stood by my side, accepting condolences. They played the part of the grieving children perfectly. But even then, I felt a distance. When the pastor asked the family to stand, Mark stepped in front of me, blocking me from the view of the congregation. It was subtle, but it was intentional. After the guests left and the last of the potato salad was put away, the atmosphere in the house changed instantly. The sympathy evaporated, replaced by a cold business-like efficiency. They stopped calling me Grace. They stopped asking how I was holding up. Instead, they began to speak around me. "We need to check the gutters." Mark said to Sarah 2 days after the funeral, standing in my kitchen drinking my coffee, "Dad let the maintenance slide." "And the landscaping?" Sarah added, not even glancing at me as I washed dishes 3 feet away. "This place is looking overgrown. We need to get it ready." Ready. Ready for what? "I can call the gardener David used." I offered, trying to bridge the gap, trying to be helpful. Mark turned to me, his face blank. "Don't worry about it. We're handling the estate management now. You just take it easy." It sounded kind, but the tone was dismissive. Estate management, not home maintenance. They were already using legal terms. They were already separating the house from the home. Suddenly, every room felt like it belonged to them. When I sat in the living room to read, Mark would come in and turn on the television loudly, not asking if I minded. When I cooked dinner, they would order takeout for themselves and eat it in the dining room, while I ate alone in the kitchen. My right to remain in the house was no longer assumed. It was being silently challenged every hour of the day. I was beginning to feel like a guest who had overstayed her welcome, a ghost haunting a property they were eager to flip. If only I had known how fast they planned to move. The erasure began with the small things. I came home from the grocery store one Tuesday to find the hallway table missing. It was a beautiful mahogany piece. David and I had bought it on our 5th anniversary. In its place was a sleek, modern metal stand that looked like it belonged in an office lobby. "Mark," I called out, setting my bags down. "Where is the hallway table?" He walked out of the garage, wiping grease from his hands. "Sold it?" he said casually. "It was old and scratched. We're clearing out the clutter." "That wasn't clutter," I said, my voice rising. "That was mine. David and I bought that together. It was in Dad's house." Mark shrugged. "It's part of the estate. Look, Grace, don't make a big deal out of it. We're just trying to modernize." Modernize. That was the code word for remove Grace. They started claiming spaces. Mark took over the garage completely. He boxed up David's woodworking tools David had promised to teach me to use, and labeled the boxes Mark A. When I asked for a screwdriver to fix a loose cabinet hinge, he told me, "I don't want you messing around in there. You might lose something." He claimed the den next. He moved his laptop and files in, closing the door that had always been open. He started controlling the thermostat, turning the heat down so low I had to wear layers inside, claiming, "We need to save on utilities if we're going to manage the assets properly." They made decisions about repairs, bills, and even the cable subscription without asking me. They canceled my gardening magazine subscription. They changed the Wi-Fi password and forgot to give it to me for 2 days. Every move felt calculated. It was a war of attrition. They were trying to make me so uncomfortable, so small, that I would simply pack my bags and leave of my own accord. They were stripping away my authority, my comfort, and my dignity, 1 inch at a time. But the humiliation was about to leave the privacy of the house. 2 weeks later, Sarah came over for a family assessment. She brought her husband and their 2 children. I thought, perhaps, seeing the grandchildren would soften the mood. I made a pot of chili, David's favorite, hoping we could sit down as a family. We were in the living room. Mark was showing Sarah some paperwork on the coffee table. The grandkids were playing on the floor. So Sarah's husband asked, looking at me with a pitying smile, "Grace, what are your plans?" "Now that, I plan to stay right here," I said, forcing a smile. This is my home. I have my garden, my church group. Mark laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound that stopped the conversation. Grace holds on to things, Mark said to the room, shaking his head. She thinks because she's been here a few years, she's the matriarch. But let's be real. He looked at me, his eyes dead. She was just Dad's wife, not our mother. There's a difference. The room went silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Just Dad's wife. No one corrected him. Sarah looked down at her papers. Her husband cleared his throat and looked away. I stood there, holding a tray of cornbread, feeling the heat rise in my neck. I felt naked. I felt invisible. I felt disposable. In private, later that evening, as I was cleaning up the chili they had barely touched, Mark walked into the kitchen. You need to be realistic, Grace, he said, leaning against the doorframe. You have no blood ties here, no blood rights. The only reason you're still here is that I haven't finalized the paperwork yet. Don't get comfortable. That humiliation stayed with me long after the house went quiet. It burned in my chest like a coal. They didn't just want the house, they wanted to erase the fact that I had ever mattered to their father. I couldn't sleep that night. The house felt hostile, the shadows stretching like long fingers trying to push me out. I went downstairs to get a glass of warm milk, walking softly in my slippers so as not to wake Mark, who was staying in the guest room down the hall. As I passed the dining room, I heard voices, low, urgent whispers. We can't wait 6 months, Mark, Sarah's voice hissed. The interest on the business loan is eating us alive. If we don't liquidate the house by the end of the quarter, we're going to default. I know. Mark snapped. I'm pushing her. I told her I'm taking the master bedroom. That should rattle her enough to leave. She's soft. She'll fold. Are you sure they will? Sarah started. Don't worry about the will, Mark interrupted. It's old. We can contest it if we have to, but if she just leaves voluntarily, it's faster. We sell the house, pay off your debt, and cover my investment losses. It's clean. I stood in the hallway, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. It wasn't grief. It wasn't about modernizing. It wasn't even about hating me. It was about money. They were in debt. Serious debt. They viewed their father's death not as a tragedy, but as a financial bailout. They didn't see a home full of memories. They saw a pile of cash they needed to grab before the bank came calling. And I was just the squatter standing between them and their payday. I finally saw their goal clearly: push me out, cash in, move on. They would sell this house, the house David loved, to the highest bidder without a second thought. I retreated to my bedroom, the room Mark had just claimed as his own. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the empty side of me. I finally broke down. I wept into my hands, my body shaking with the force of it. I grieved for David. I grieved for the loneliness of the last few weeks. But mostly, I grieved for the lie. The lie that I had a family. The lie that my kindness had purchased their loyalty. I had spent 12 years loving people who saw me as nothing more than an insurance policy. I cried until my throat was raw. I cried until there were no tears left. And then, in the silence that followed, something shifted. I looked at the wedding ring on my finger. David had placed it there with a promise. To love and to cherish. To protect. He knew them. Deep down, he must have known them better than I did. He knew Mark was impulsive with money. He knew Sarah was easily led. A cold resolve settled over me. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and burns out quickly. This was steel. I wiped my face. I straightened my back. I decided right then and there that I would stop shrinking to survive. I would not let them desecrate David's memory for a quick buck. The next morning, I waited until Mark left for work. He had a meeting with a realtor. He didn't tell me, but I saw the appointment on the kitchen calendar he had put up. Once his car pulled out of the driveway, I went to work. David was a meticulous man. He kept files for everything, but he was also private. He had a fireproof lockbox in the back of the study closet that Mark hadn't found yet because it was hidden behind a stack of old encyclopedias. I pulled the heavy box out. I knew the combination out. Our anniversary. Click. The lid popped open. Inside were the papers David had told me about years ago. Papers I had let slip from my mind in the fog of grief. There were insurance policies. There was a letter addressed to me. And there, at the bottom, was a thick document with a blue cover. The deed to the house. And attached to it, a marriage agreement amendment. I read through them, my heart pounding in my ears. The legal language was dense, but the words, joint tenancy with right of survivorship, were clear as day. I didn't stop there. I went to the phone and called Mr. Abernathy. He was an old friend of David's, a lawyer who had known the family for 30 years. Grace, Mr. Abernathy's voice was warm and gravelly. I've been expecting your call. I tried to reach out last week, but Mark told me you were indisposed. He lied. I said, my voice steady. I suspected as much, he said. Do you have the box? I do. Good. Bring it to my office. We have work to do. For the first time since David's death, I felt the ground solid beneath my feet. I wasn't just a widow anymore. I was a woman with a plan. I spent the afternoon at Mr. Abernathy's office. When I returned, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn. I walked into the house and stopped dead. There was noise coming from upstairs. Thumping. Dragging. I ran up the stairs. Mark was in the master bedroom. He had a stack of cardboard boxes. He was taking my clothes out of the closet, my dresses, my coats, the sweater I had worn on my first date with David, and throwing them into boxes. What are you doing? I demanded, breathless. Mark didn't even look up. I told you yesterday, Grace. I'm taking this room. You didn't start packing, so I'm helping you along. You can sleep in the guest room tonight. I've already moved Dad's stuff to the garage. He touched my belongings as if they were trash. He handled my life as if it were an infection he was sanitizing. Put that down, I said. No, he said, turning to face me, a sneer on his face. I'm done waiting. You're leaving this room today, and honestly, you should start looking for an apartment. We're listing the house on Monday. He picked up the framed photo of David and me from the nightstand, the one from our wedding day, and tossed it onto the bed. It didn't break, but the disrespect was violent. That was the moment. That was the line. Mark, I said. My voice was frighteningly calm. Put the box down and come downstairs. I'm busy. Come downstairs, I repeated, or I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. He laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He saw something in my eyes he hadn't seen before. The step monster wasn't scared anymore. She was ready. 10 minutes later, Mark sat at the kitchen table. He looked annoyed, checking his watch. Make it quick, Grace. I have things to do. Sit down, I said. I didn't sit. I stood at the head of the table where David used to sit. I placed the blue folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood was heavy, final. You have spent the last month trying to bully me, I began. You have treated me like a servant in my own home. You have insulted me. You have tried to erase me. Grace, please, quiet, I snapped. I am speaking. He closed his mouth, stunned. You told me I have no blood rights. You told me this is your father's house. You are half right. It was your father's house. I opened the folder, read it. Mark leaned forward. I watched his eyes scan the document. I watched the arrogance drain from his face like water from a cracked cup. I watched his skin turn a pale, sickly gray. This can't be right, he stammered. It is, I said. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Do you know what that means, Mark? He didn't answer. He couldn't. It means, I continued, my voice ringing in the silence, that the moment your father died, this house didn't go into the estate. It didn't go to you. It transferred automatically, instantly, and legally. To me. I leaned in, placing my hands on the table. I own this house 100%, not you, not Sarah. Me, the deed is in my name. I pulled out another paper, and this is a copy of the life insurance policy. David changed the beneficiary 3 years ago. He knew you were reckless with money, Mark. He left you a small sum, which you've likely already spent. But the bulk of it, it's in a trust. For me, to maintain my home. The silence that followed was deafening. The power in the room had shifted so violently that I could almost feel the air pressure change. No, Mark whispered. We have the loans. We leveraged the sale. The bank is expecting the listing next week. That sounds like a personal problem, I said coldly. You can't do this? He stood up, but he was shaking. We'll lose everything? My business? Sarah's debt. You should have thought of that before you tried to evict a widow from her own home, I replied. I slid a letter across the table. This is from Mr. Abernathy. It explains that you are no longer welcome on this property without an invitation. It also outlines the legal consequences of harassment and elder abuse, which, given your behavior regarding my belongings today, is a charge we are prepared to explore. Mark looked at the letter, then at me. The landlord was gone. The bully was gone. All that was left was a terrified boy who had gambled and lost. Grace, he pleaded, his voice cracking. We're family. Family? I raised an eyebrow. Yesterday I was just Dad's wife. Yesterday I had no blood rights. You can't use the title of family only when it suits your bank account. Mark, he broke. He slammed his fist on the table and yelled, You manipulated him! You stole this from us! You witch! He screamed until his face was red, accusing me of every sin, every betrayal. He let all the ugly greed pour out. I stood there unmoving. I let him scream. I let him tire himself out. When he finally stopped panting, Tears of frustration streaming down his face, I spoke softly. I didn't steal anything, Mark. I loved him. And he loved me enough to protect me from exactly this. I walked to the door and held it open. Respect is not inherited. I told him, looking him in the eye. It is earned, and you have earned nothing but my pity. Leave my house. He looked at me one last time. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg, perhaps to curse, but he saw the wall of steel in my eyes. He grabbed his keys and walked out. I locked the door behind him. I slid the deadbolt into place. The sound of the lock clicking was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I walked upstairs to the master bedroom. I picked up the box of my clothes that Mark had packed. I unpacked them one by one, hanging them back in the closet. I picked up the photo of David and me from the bed and placed it back on the nightstand. I reclaimed my room. I reclaimed my home. Over the next few weeks, I made changes. I brought my mahogany table back from the consignment shop where Mark had sold it. Luckily, they hadn't sold it yet. I hired my own gardener. I changed the locks. I was no longer walking on eggshells. I was walking on my own floors. The silence in the house changed again. It wasn't heavy anymore, it was peaceful. It was a sanctuary. I sat in my chair, drinking my coffee, looking out at the garden. I missed David terribly, but I felt him with me. I felt him smiling. I finally slept in peace, knowing my dignity was intact. So, listen to me closely, loves. There will be people in this world who try to tell you that you don't belong. They will try to use biology or history, or loud voices to push you out of the spaces you have built with your own love and labor. But family is not defined by bloodlines or entitlement. It is defined by actions. It is defined by who holds your hand in the hospital, who makes the soup, and who keeps and makes the peace. Never let grief make you surrender your worth. Never let them convince you that you are small just because you are quiet. Quiet strength, patience, and truth will always outlast cruelty. The truth is a slow walker, but it always arrives on time, and remember, those who rush to take what isn't theirs often forget to check the deed. The end.